Okay, well, we will make a start. I know it's Friday afternoon for many people on the line, so we will get going and then, hopefully get out of here not too late in the day. And for those joining from other time zones, happy lunchtime or earlier in the day if we have anyone on the line from Europe. Thank you for waking up nice and early for this one. I'll just go through some introductions quickly and then we will move on into the presentations, which I know everyone's really excited to hear about. So my name is Declan Buterac. I'm the Vietnam Portfolio Manager for the BPP. I'm sure most of you on the line have met me in some way or another in recent times. So really excited to have this session kick off on gender and carbon markets here today. And we have some really, really exciting presenters. Before we start, just some housekeeping for the session. So I think you might have the ability to unmute yourselves, but I just ask that everyone please keep themselves on mute during the presentations. There will be some opportunity for some moderated question and answer afterwards, but there's also the chat function there. So I'll keep an eye on the chat for any questions during the presentations. Feel free to drop those questions in there. Vietnamese is welcome as well. Hong, I'll just ask if you can keep one eye on any Vietnamese language questions in the chat. Please do raise your hand as we get into the moderated Q&A. We may have some time for some verbal questions. Also really keen at the end to hear some thoughts and experiences, particularly from those partners working in the space. If you have any interesting insights from your personal experiences, we'd love to hear those as well during the last part of the session. And this session is being recorded. So just to let everyone know of that, the session is being recorded and we will make the presentations and the recording available to BPP partners afterwards, especially for those who find this interesting and want to refer back to it, or perhaps have a partner who couldn't make it today. We'd love to be able to share the insights as well. So we have three really exciting presentations today. Firstly, from Belinda Lucas, our BPP JEDSI advisor. Then I'll welcome Anshika Gupta from Gold Standard and Alexandra Carranza from Verra. So I'll make those introductions as we get into their presentations. But firstly, I'd like to welcome Belinda Lucas, who many of you would have interacted with. She is the BPP JEDSI advisor, has worked across a range of DFAT programs and comes with a really strong wealth of knowledge in this space. So I will stop sharing, Belinda, so that you can share your presentation and hand it over to you now.
Yep. Give me a sec.
All good.
What can you see? Nothing really.
We can see ourselves. It's
It says I'm sharing, but let's see what we can. Wonderful screen. No. Declan, do you want to try sharing for me? And given that I'm not technically capable.
yeah, let me just bring it up.
Thank you. I'll stop sharing. In the meantime, a big hello and a welcome to everyone online. We are, as Declan said, so excited that so many of you have dialed in. And just as a preface to, I suppose, the reason that we've put together this learning event is the BPP is obviously a program that seeks to work with partners all around the world, and in this case in Vietnam, on business initiatives that deliver social outcomes and impact. But as you'd all know, as a DFAT program, we have very committed to gender equality and social inclusion. So this is a fantastic opportunity to bring together really people who are working at the cutting edge of the carbon markets and really reflect on the opportunities in those markets for work and focus on gender inclusion and gender equality. Thanks, Declan. So I'll introduce you to the case for gender inclusion in carbon markets. And then I'm really delighted to be able to hand over to Gold Standard and Verra to give you some ideas about their work and opportunities that they see in the market. So I'm not going to make a case today for the ethical reasons that we should focus on gender equality. I think we all know that this is a priority in all societies, and it's clear the case is made about why gender equality is important. So instead, what I'm going to do today is really look at the opportunities that gender inclusion in the carbon market presents. And I'm going to look at this through three lenses. The first is that the inclusion of women and girls in carbon projects actually are shown to improve climate outcomes. So there's a direct climate benefit to gender inclusion. The second is, and this makes sense, of course, is that when we work with women and women participate in carbon projects and climate initiatives and natural resource solutions and leadership, then we're going to achieve improved gender equality outcomes. And the final one is really a business case. And that is, I really want to touch on the opportunity for premium priced carbon credits that really don't deliver just climate outcomes, but also deliver social impact with a particular focus on gender equality, and start some discussion around some of the challenges and the opportunities in a premium priced carbon market. Thanks, Declan. So I might just firstly touch on why we think it's relevant that gender inclusion actually drives improved climate outcomes. So the first of this, and I think many of you will be aware of this in the work that you do, is that we know that women comprise nearly half of all agricultural labour force in developing countries. I think it's the actual statistic is about 43%. And the role of women in rural economies is crucial. We know that in most vicinities, women are frequently the primary caretakers of natural resources. So women are usually the primary caretaker or resource provider for water, for forests, and also land in many communities. So while we know that land is owned by men mostly in most developing countries that we work in, we know that the caretakers are often men and women together, with women playing a really strong role. Now, the reason that this is relevant to climate outcomes is that women have some very long-standing, deep, traditional, and unique knowledge and perspectives that can really contribute to better decision-making and resource management. So that first point there is that those women who are in rural and Indigenous communities often really possess this very deep knowledge of sustainable practices, and there's a real opportunity to lean on that knowledge and ensure that women's insights and perspectives and experience and wisdom are included when we think about climate initiatives. The second one is a more practical reason, and that is that we know that increasingly with labour mobility and increased drive towards urbanisation, that women tend to be the ones that tend to stay and are left behind in rural and farming communities. Of course, women are also involved in urban migration, but women tend to be less mobile compared to men due to a whole range of social and economic factors, the least of which is childcare and caring responsibilities for elders and children. So this means that women often remain in their communities, they continue to manage agricultural activities, they continue to tend to household responsibilities, while men often migrate to urban areas in search of higher paying jobs or opportunities. So this means that this reduced mobility for women means that they're more likely to maintain continuity in agricultural practices and resource management, and therefore ensure that sustainable practices are continuously applied. And this is why there's a real case to be made for investing in women's skills, training and engagement in resource management projects, including carbon markets. And finally, the third one there is that we know this not just in the agricultural and natural resource management space, but in all spaces, is that when women participate in leadership roles, it tends to foster greater inclusivity in decision-making process. And the reason this is important for climate is that if women are involved in climate projects and they're undertaking inclusive practices in decision-making and community building, it can lead to the adoption of more sustainable and agreed behaviours within families and communities, which amplifies the positive impacts of climate initiatives. So women's participation in leadership and in climate projects ensures that benefits and opportunities in these initiatives are distributed more equitably across communities, reduce social inequalities and foster greater, and this is what's most important, greater community buy-in and cooperation, which is ultimately crucial for the long-term success of climate projects. So I thought this is just a helpful framing to think about why is this relevant from a climate perspective. And I'm going to go on now to talking about how this is also beneficial for women from a gender equality perspective. Thanks, Declan. And again, Declan, thanks. So historically, and I think some of you would be aware of this given your involvement in the carbon market, is women tend to have been underrepresented in carbon initiatives, especially in developing countries. And yet we know, and you'll hear more about this in the other presentations today, we know that gender equality and women's empowerment are increasingly recognised globally as important to our economies and to our social outcomes, but also integral to climate policy. And this has been recognised through the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC. So here's just kind of three angles where we know women's involvement in carbon markets can drive real and meaningful outcomes. So the first is a simple one, and I think you'll all be able to make build the argument for this, is livelihoods. So given that carbon market projects, one of the benefits, obviously, is that there's increased income for communities. There's a real risk that if we leave women out of those projects, that the income can go predominantly to male or male leaders in communities. So it's really important that when we're thinking about increased livelihoods, that we're thinking about where women are visible in those communities and ensuring that their involvement can lead to economic opportunities for women. So participation in carbon markets can provide women with new income streams. And an example could be, for example, women involved in biochar production could earn money from selling carbon credits and biomass feedstock. We also know that carbon market projects often include training components, and this relates to this middle section on skills. And these training components can easily overlook the involvement of women because women may be involved in other responsibilities, and often women are invisible in agricultural activities. But when we invest in skills training for women, it can help women acquire new skills in sustainable practices, things like carbon measurement, project management, which increases beyond the carbon project their employability and empowerment. And finally, the last one is leadership. And I touched on this in my last slide in terms of the role of women's leadership in driving climate outcomes. But additionally, when we involve women in leadership roles, we also change the norms around what women do and don't do. And providing the opportunity to provide women space in leadership actually starts to change the profile of who is involved in climate activities and who's involved in carbon markets. It changes their social capital. And importantly, when you put women in leadership positions, it allows women to advocate for gender sensitive approaches and ensure that, as well as their own perspective, that other women's needs and perspectives are considered. And sometimes it's all too easy to run a project and have mostly men involved because they already have the technical skills or they're the ones that have time and availability. But if we make the extra effort and we include women in leadership roles, we obviously drive really long-term benefits for women's profile in communities and their ability to influence change. So all over, across these three areas, you can see that there's real potential to increase gender equality and avoid missing those opportunities for better project outcomes, not just climate outcomes, but gender equality outcomes as well. Thanks, Declan. So this is just a final reflection on how these two come together, the gender outcome and the climate outcome. We know that women, particularly rural and Indigenous women, play a really important role in agricultural production and forest management, and they are uniquely positioned to be involved in the management of nature-based solutions, driving both climate outcomes and gender equality outcomes. Thanks, Declan. So finally, and I think this is where I think it gets really interesting to hear your perspectives and reflections on the viability and potential of the carbon market to really reward carbon projects for investing in climate and gender together. And there's been some research around this, and I know you'll hear from Gold Standard and Verra in a little while to hear about their experience of this too. But what we do know is that there's all over our economy a growing interest in ESG, so the combination of environmental, social, and governance outcomes. And where this relates to the carbon market is we see a growing demand amongst buyers for more expensive, higher integrity carbon credits, which meet these robust social environmental standards. This includes an interest in credits that can prove a do no harm outcome, and also credits that can deliver genuine opportunities for women, with transformative stories being particularly engaging and interesting to investors. Carbon credits that deliver gender outcomes provide additional social benefits beyond just carbon sequestration or emissions reduction. So I'd be interested in your reflections on whether you are also hearing that there's a demand among corporate buyers for these higher priced carbon credits. So by empowering women and addressing gender equalities, carbon projects can demonstrate to investors and buyers that carbon projects contribute to broader development goals, including poverty alleviation, improved health, education, all which relate to gender equality. And these combined impacts, environmental and social, justifies a premium price. It delivers greater value to those buyers who are increasingly looking at high impact investments, which align with their corporate social responsibility goals. We know in a range of sectors that companies are willing to pay a premium that align with their values and demonstrate these commitments. And this has increasingly been recognised as essential to sustainable development. So while the market is still nascent in this area, we know that there is a real groundswell of support and interest in this combination of carbon outcomes, climate outcomes, and gender outcomes. So finally, and I think you'll hear much more about this when we listen to Gold Standard and Verra, which is why we're so delighted that we've got partners that are able to join us in this learning event tonight, is that there's obviously a real role for credit agencies, crediting programs, in how we can prove to buyers that there's integrity in the linkage between carbon projects, carbon outcomes, carbon credits, and social impacts. And so you'll hear tonight or this afternoon from Gold Standard, and you'll also hear from Verra reflecting on the W+ standard, both of which include gender criteria. And this development of these criteria and standards really starts to respond to the demand from buyers. So while they're new, not new, they've been developed for a while, but while their implementation is new, there's obviously more developers that really need to come on board to embrace these standards. And the standards cover a whole range of sub-criteria that relate to leadership, health, food security, women's time poverty, income and assets, education and knowledge. So the adoption of these specific requirements of gender inside the standards provides clearer guidance and examples for project developers. And it allows a way for carbon credit producers to more robustly collect impact data so that we can really label projects as empowering women and therefore be eligible for these premium priced carbon credits. And that's really what we would love to hear you all engage on and reflect on as you go forward with your own carbon initiatives. Thanks, Declan.
Thanks for that, Belinda. Oh, is it the end or sorry?
Yeah, I was just going to. This is final wrap up. So I just wanted to reflect on these, three overarching cases for why this is important for us. You'll hear more about some of the challenges, I think, in the next couple of presentations. But really, for us, it's triple purpose, right? So the combination of gender and carbon drives improved climate outcomes, improved gender equality outcomes, and hopefully improved pricing for the carbon market. I look forward to the other presentations, and I welcome questions at the end of the presentations. Over to you, Declan.
Thanks, Belinda. I think there is one in the chat from Phil. Do you think that there is a risk for increased gender-based violence due to carbon projects?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think there's always a potential for increased gender-based violence when you change social dynamics. So as I think it's important that as as partners start to work with communities in any form, that they're really conscious of the dynamics that they're encountering, and that wherever possible that there's awareness raising amongst both men and women of gender-based violence, and that there's the right supports provided when we're engaging women in these projects to ensure that men aren't disenfranchised. And ideally, and I think this is important in most of the work that we all do, is that men and women are engaged together in carbon projects, that you're not prioritising one over another because it can create conflict. Thanks, Phil, for the question. Others might have opinions too.
Okay, and one there from Eloise. How can partners make sure that they are making their community engagement around carbon credits accessible to women? Maybe a practical example, I think, with that one as well.
Yeah, this is a really excellent example, and I think this relates to all types of projects. I think it's really important when partners are working with communities that they ask themselves who's attending consultations and meetings. So if you find that you're consulting with communities and you're mostly meeting men, it's important to ask yourselves, how do we engage women in those communities? And that might mean that you need to make time or arrange times that women are more easily able to access, noting that women have got lots of other responsibilities of caring for elders and caring for children and attending to chores and work. So really being sure that you're checking when women are available to attend meetings and then making sure that they're at that time. But also it can be, you can create spaces where women feel more comfortable. So sometimes it might be creating women's only space to ensure that women come together, or it might be contacting a local women's organisation who are able to mobilise local women to come and spend time with you. We see some partners accommodate some of women's needs. So it might be creating a place that's really accessible to women, it's close to their homes, or that there's childcare available, or that there's transport included to make sure that women can attend meetings. So there's lots of different strategies, but I think, Eloise, you raise a great point, is most of it requires lots of thoughtfulness and then resourcing to make sure that it happens. It often doesn't happen by accident, it happens by design. So great question, Eloise.
Awesome. Thanks, Belinda. If anyone has any further questions, Belinda will be hanging around through the rest of the call. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, maybe even with a name on there, direct them to Belinda. Otherwise, we may come back to you during the Q&A at the end. I'm now going to just bring my presentation back up. Actually, I might just move straight on to Anshika. She can share her presentation if you're ready.
We've got a question in the chat for Belinda.
Oh, one's come through. Okay, we have time. We can do that one. Have you encountered challenges such as local customs or practices in agricultural production? For example, females are not encouraged to participate in aquacultural production due to certain superstition. And what is your advice to partners addressing these? That's from the DFAT team in Ho Chi Minh City.
It's a great question. And I don't think I've come across the superstition issue in aquaculture specifically, but I think that's a very interesting one. I think in general, it's hard to be specific, but we need to understand cultural context really carefully. So, I think when a partner is going to work with a community, we often suggest that they undertake their own gender analysis. And that can sound really technical, but in a simple way, it's really asking communities, where are women in a community and what are their roles and what are the norms that enable or prevent them from participating. And some of those norms, like superstitions, might be really hard to overcome. But partners can play a really important role in helping break down barriers and working with communities to understand norms and challenge those norms in culturally sensitive ways. And, one way that, we've worked with other partners in different projects is, for example, when we've negotiated contracts with farmers, we've really tried to encourage that men and women sign a contract together so that we're confident that both men and women understand the implications of a project, and that they both feel that they are going to benefit from the project and they both have a commitment to it. And it starts to build that family unity around the work that we're doing with the project while not leaving women out. I think the other thing that we often find is really helpful is that when partners model women in leadership. So if you have field officers spending time in communities, and that might be in aquaculture, for example, if you've got women field officers, working on training, it starts to bust the myth that women aren't involved in those sectors. Whereas if you've got mostly male field officers working with mostly male farmers, it just doesn't break down those barriers or those stereotypes. So I think it's really important to that point in their question that we need to be really sensitive to the context, but then really try to work with communities to think about how we challenge those in safe and appropriate ways. Thanks, Deepa.
Thanks for that, Belinda. Okay, I'll move on now to our next presenter. So I'd just like to welcome Anshika Gupta. She is the Manager of Standard Development and Innovation at Gold Standard. For those that have questions, Anshika's got to jump off the call in half an hour. So we look forward to hearing the presentation, but please do come forward with any questions that you have during the presentation, and we can have a quick Q&A at the end before she has to jump off the call for a prior commitment. So over to you, Anshika. We can see your presentation now.
Thanks, Declan, and thanks, Belinda. Your presentation was great, and it is a perfect precursor of what I'm going to talk right now. So let's talk about how to integrate gender in the carbon market. What is the Gold Standard going to do about it? So before that, hi everyone. Thank you for joining. And my name is Anshika, like Declan told you, and I work with the Gold Standard Foundation in the capacity of Manager for Standard Development and Innovation. So let's move on. So let's first touch upon what are the agenda points that we'll be talking about today. We'll be talking about how climate change is often referred to as a threat multiplier, and what are the threats that make the female gender more vulnerable, and what is the role of climate change in enhancing that vulnerability. After that, I'll be giving a brief overview of the Gold Standard for Global Goals gender requirements, and also the challenges and the solutions that the project developers face while not only implementing these gender responsive or gender sensitive projects, but also while getting them validated or verified. So before we proceed, let's take a moment and soak in these statistics. So women and girls are disproportionately affected by climate change, making up 80% of those that are displaced by the climate-related disaster. And that also comes from a fact that Belinda very clearly explained in her presentation on how men are usually migrating to the cities in lookout for better livelihood, and women are usually back at rural places looking after children or the elderly, and usually these are the places which are first affected by the climate change disasters. So that is one of the major reasons it makes them more vulnerable to these climate-related disasters. And the second, another startling statistic is after the 2010 Pakistan floods, it affected 20 million people, and the girls' school attendance dropped significantly. However, in some regions, only 40% of the girls continued their education post-disasters as compared to 70% those of boys. So once we soak in these startling statistics, let's move on and talk about the threat multiplier. So like I mentioned, climate change is referred to as threat multiplier. However, that makes it extremely important to understand what are the threats that the climate change has a capacity to multiply. Let's begin with gender roles. So societal norms and traditions often dictate how women and men should think, act, and also feel. Women are frequently expected to fulfill traditional roles such as caregiving and homemaking, which limits their freedom to pursue education, career, and personal ambitions. This restriction enhances their vulnerability as they are often economically dependent on male members of the family. Talking about the gender gap, it highlights a disparity and inequality between women and men's conditioning due to their societal position or the roles. This gap manifests in several ways, including limited participation, limited access to opportunities, unequal rights, lack of decision-making power, lower income, and of course, limited control over resources. So these inequalities leave women more vulnerable to economic instability and social marginalization. Third, and I think it is one of the most important area to tackle when we talk about the vulnerability, is the reproductive and the domestic roles. They further increase women's vulnerability. The duties around care and maintenance of the household, such as cooking, cleaning, and child rearing, often lead to time poverty. Women spend a significant portion of their time on unpaid domestic work, which limits their ability to engage in economic, educational, or recreational activities, thereby perpetuating their vulnerability. Talking about economic gaps are direct consequence of women's unpaid work. With less time and opportunity to participate in any economic activities, women often face financial insecurities and, of course, limited career advancements. So this economic dependency makes them more vulnerable to poverty and exploitation. And it is also fueled by the education gap, which contributes significantly. Due to gendered social and cultural roles and responsibilities, there are large disparities in access of learning. Women account for 2/3 of the world's illiterate population, which limits their opportunities for personal and professional development, and it also perpetuates cycles of poverty and dependence. Talking about political representation, women's historic disadvantage and discriminatory laws and institutions have limited their participation in decision making at almost all the levels. The lack of political representation means women's needs and perspectives are often overlooked in policy making because that is often made by a consortium which is male dominated. So they don't know what the women's problems are that needs to be addressed by those policies that they're trying to make. Talking about violence against women and girls, and someone also highlighted it on the chat. These are the harmful norms and practices which are combined with structured gender-based power difference. It places women at significant risk of multiple forms of violence. This includes not only domestic violence and sexual assault, but also human trafficking. Such violence not only affects women's physical and mental health, but also restricts their freedom and opportunities, perpetuating again a cycle of vulnerability and oppression. In the end, talking about the agricultural and land tenures. So women face substantial vulnerabilities in this area because they are disproportionately affected by poverty, discrimination, and exploitation, which limits their access to and control over economic assets, including land. So less than 20% of the landholders are women, reflecting a significant gender disparity that enhances their economic vulnerability and limits their ability to achieve financial independence. So keeping all of these in mind, hold that thought, and now we'll talk about how the impacts of climate change, once they combine with these existing issues and vulnerabilities, how it makes situation even more deteriorated for women. We know that climate change is already leading to a lot of changes on the planet, some of which I've highlighted here are reduced food productivity, water scarcity, extreme weather events, loss of natural resources, and of course, displacement and migration. When such changes occur, they fuel the already existing vulnerabilities for females due to the factors we discussed in the previous slides. For example, females are usually considered responsible for preparing food for the family. Thus, in the event of reduced food productivity and water scarcity, they may have to travel long distances to procure the same resource for their family. This will in turn make them vulnerable to a lot of health or injury risks and will also increase their time poverty. Now, after realizing all of it and after realizing the importance of including the gender lens in the carbon projects, what has gold standard done about it? So now I'll talk about what are the gold standards efforts towards gender equality and women empowerment. I would like to first introduce you to the gold standards gender policy. So as a commitment, gold standard wants to promote gender equality and women's empowerment in climate action. Gold Standard also commits to ensure that Secretariat and its governing body promotes gender equality and female empowerment through its overall impact. So gold standards commitment is not only restricted to the projects that it certifies, but also to its own operation, which includes the technical advisory board, the management, and of course the secretariat. The purpose of this policy is to provide a framework for integrating gender considerations in carbon projects and also to enhance the social impact of the carbon projects while addressing the gender inequalities. Now that we know about the gender policy, let us learn a little about the applicability. Where does it apply? Like I mentioned, it applies at all the levels of gold standards functioning, including GS4GG. It applies at the institutional level, that is, in day-to-day governance, operations, and procedures. It applies at the project level, enabling women and men to make equitable contribution to and benefit from projects which are certified under gold standard. It applies at the certification level, where a better account for and audit gender differentials in the social value created by gold standard certified projects is required. And it also applies at the sectoral level to contribute to high quality, more comprehensive and systematic gender disaggregated data. Now that we know about the gender policy and its applicability, let's talk about GS4GG gender equality requirements and guidelines. In order to ensure that all the projects which are certified under gold standard comply with the gender policy, we created this gender equality requirements and guidelines. So it was created with an intention of closing the gender gap, which will help accelerate progress towards many other SDGs. It requires all the gold standard projects to be gender sensitive at least. It is a broad framework on gender impact. These are not hardcore requirements, but they are a broad framework that the project developer can use to ensure that the project is gender sensitive at least. And these requirements are very open-ended, where PDs can choose their method in which they seem is the most appropriate for their project specific case. The gender equality requirements distribute these efforts into two. One is the gender sensitive, another is the gender responsive. Gender sensitive is mandatory for all projects to comply with. This ensures that all the projects are at least using the gender lens when they're designing the project. If the project developer has the capacity or the intent, they can go one step ahead of being gender sensitive and actually be gender responsive, which is optional for the projects. It is not mandatory. Let's discuss about both of them in a little bit more detail. Talking about gender sensitive, like I mentioned, it is mandatory for all the projects to be certified under Gold Standard for Global Goals. The project design has to take into account overall societal context from a gender perspective, which would include the host country gender policies and national gender strategies as well, in addition to the local context that the project developer best knows. This also requires the project to comply with the safeguarding principle assessment, specifically the principle number 2, which in detail talks about gender equality and women's empowerment. And the project developer under gender sensitivity is also required to conduct a gender sensitive stakeholder consultation. It is done with an intent to strengthen the gold standards do not harm approach and to address the safeguards to prevent and mitigate adverse effects on men and women and girls and boys. Gender sensitive certification refers to raising awareness and consideration of gender norms, roles, and relations, but it does not mean that the project developer has to address these inequalities as well. However, if the project developer wants to address these inequalities, then they'll be classified as gender responsive. It is optional for the activities. It is a proactive approach. And in this approach, actual performance of the project is monitored and reported. Now let's go into a little bit more detail about gender responsive, the requirements. First basic requirement of being gender responsive is to determine the baseline. If I don't use these jargons, if I tell you in a very simple language, determining baseline means knowing the local context, knowing the present situation. What is the situation that we're trying to improve here? How bad is the situation? What is going good? What is it that we need to improve further? The different situations of men and women, and also the impact of the project that will have on the different groups. Both these things have to be identified by the project developer, based on which the project developer shall design monitoring framework while setting the gender responsive targets and performance indicators. And the gender requirements and the guidelines also give a few suggested indicators in the document. However, it is not mandatory to use only those indicators. The project developers can, of course, create their own indicators and report them. Then based on these design monitoring framework, the monitoring of the project has to take place. And of course, the baseline which was established in the first step has also to be taken into consideration. So we recently had our first gender responsive issuance. This is a safe water supply project in Uganda. So I'm going to present this as a good practice example here. The title of the project is the Lango Safe Water Project, situated in Uganda. So this project has various impacts, and the key SDG impacts being it has provided almost 40,000 people with access to safe water. Now, talking about how it is gender responsive in its implementation, it saved women almost 4 hours per week from the usual chores that they were doing related to fetching safe water, which was an improvement of 19% from the baseline. It also resulted into 46% of local water committees being managed by women. By managed, I mean managing the boreholes, operations, and everything. All the work related to those boreholes was being managed by women. 46% of that entire workforce is now women. After the implementation of the project, the reported domestic violence linked to water collection dropped to 0 from 35% in the baseline, which was a huge win for the project. And 100% of the surveyed water users spent the time on domestic work as well as income generating activities and social or leisure activity. So it solved the issue of time poverty, the violence, and of course, the women in economic activities. Now, talking about what are the challenges for such projects? These projects are not easy to design or implement because gender is a sensitive topic to deal with when you're dealing with, people who do not have access to such information. So starting with the traditional gender roles. So these roles often restrict women's participation due to cultural norms. This resistance to change requires sustained efforts to transform these deeply ingrained roles. So these conditionings are not only ingrained in men, but also in women. So it's very difficult to bring them out from that. It requires sustained efforts, which is also becomes very impossible because of the limited awareness of gender equality among stakeholders, which hinders its integration into the projects. And this highlights the need for targeted education and awareness raising activities. Talking about policy and regulatory gaps, many contexts lack supportive policies and have inconsistent enforcement, which weakens the gender equality efforts. Strengthening the policy framework is extremely essential in this area. And organizations often lack the training and resources needed to address gender issues effectively, which leads to lack of institutional capacity. Building this capacity is crucial for successful gender integration. Insufficient funding for gender-focused activity is a major barrier, thus leading to a funding limitation for these projects. And even with available resources, gender consideration can be sidelined because of resource allocation. Targeted investment in gender responsive measures is necessary to ensure that these initiatives receive proper attention, and this measure is always on priority. Talking about insufficient data and monitoring and evaluation, lack of this data often makes it very difficult to design a baseline and compare the efforts and the impact of the project. So these are few of the challenges which the project developers has to face when they're implementing the projects. But of course, there can be case-specific issues as well that the project developers face when they're on ground and dealing with the people directly. There are a few challenges for these projects also while they're getting audited. So in Gold Stand for Global Goals, if a project has to receive a gender responsive certification, then the validating or verifying body also has to have a gender expert in their team. And like I mentioned, it is also a sensitive topic to discuss. So having a gender expert who has this kind of knowledge on how to audit such information and how to go on ground and deal with people and ask them these questions, that becomes extremely difficult, not only for the project developers to find such a BEP, but also for the BEPs to find such a gender expert. So this is one of the major challenges that comes during the certification of these projects. Now we have talked about the challenges and the issues. We can now talk about the solutions and also the best practices. Talking about community engagement, like Belinda also highlighted how community engagement is extremely important when we are trying to implement any such project. Involving local communities and women's group from the outset is crucial. Building trust through dialogue and education helps address cultural barriers and fosters great acceptance of gender equality initiatives. Talking about capacity building, providing training and resources to project team is very essential for effective gender integration. Collaborating with gender experts and organizations can further strengthen the project outcomes. Also, advocating for supportive policies and regulations at both local and national level is also the key. Working closely with governments to strengthen gender-related legal frameworks ensure long-term impact. So if a project developer has a capacity to do this, then we highly encourage them to go this way. Securing dedicated funding for gender sensitive activities is also very critical so that gender equality initiatives get the priority when the resources are being mobilized. Leveraging financial mechanisms that prioritize gender equality can enhance the sustainability of these efforts. Last but not the least, data collection and analysis. Investing in gender disaggregated data collection is vital for informed decision making. Developing and utilizing specific indicators enables accurate monitoring of the gender impacts. Summing up whatever we just discussed, gender lens is extremely important in any climate change intervention. And this area needs a lot of innovation because there is still a lot of room for development and work in this area. GS has put into place policies and frameworks to achieve it. However, it is not limited to a specific approach. The project developers are always encouraged to innovate and suggest different methods because they are the people who are working on ground and know the issues of the land. And GS is also open to work with project developers who are interested in gender impact certification in order to develop this overall process. So that is all from my side for today. If there are any questions, I'll be very happy to discuss.
Thanks for that, Anshika. It sounds like a couple of people couldn't see the slides for a bit there, so we'll try to make those available, hopefully, through the recording. If it was recording from my screen, it should be okay. Otherwise, I'll ask if you can share those in the future. A couple of questions have come through. Firstly, one from me. How do project developers or stakeholders make small changes to the way they do their project or contribute to changes of gender integration whilst also working within those contexts of traditional and cultural gender norms in the various cultures in which we work?
I'm sorry, Declan, I missed you in the middle. Can you please repeat what you said? Can you please repeat the question?
Yes. So given the projects in this space work across lots of different cultures with different traditional gender norms, and similar to that question earlier about different superstitions, what are some practical examples that project developers and other stakeholders can use to make those small positive changes while still respecting and working within those different cultures?
That's a very good question and very practical question. So I would say, number one, familiarize with the social context of the area. And for that, the project developers can include people who are extremely respected in that society. For example, a school teacher, a headmaster of the teacher, or maybe a local panchayat. I'm not sure if a lot of people are aware of what is a panchayat, but it's like a local governing body of that village, which gathers together and takes decision if there are small issues that the population of that village is facing. So they usually have a supervisor or a head of that local crew. He or she is extremely respected there. So, and of course, if there is any local government employee that works in that area, or there are women-related NGOs that work in that particular geography, it's always a good idea to first go and discuss with them. If there are bank branches, you can go and discuss with the women employees of the bank, because they usually know what are the issues related to finances of the women in that society. So it's always a better idea to not directly go and approach the end users, but first go and see what the area is like. You can also go and visit the local medical, local hospitals that a small village might have. You can go and discuss about the doctors there, and that's where you will get to know about the superstitions if they have. And it's a very practical thing. At least I can tell you about the rural part of the India, these kind of superstitions, especially around menstruation or puberty. These are very rampant, and it's real, not only in agriculture but also in household, daily kind of working of the women, that also kind of makes them very vulnerable to a lot of gender-based violence. So it's always a good idea to not reach the users first, reach the people who are respected in that community. Once you have the local context, go and outreach the users with people from their own community who know the local language, who know the local context. And I'll tell you one more very practical example. When I used to go on site, I used to audit these carbon projects. I used to observe that your dressing, this is a very small thing to say, but your dressing has a very powerful impact on how these people are going to interact with you or not. If you dress up in like a local context, if they feel you're one of them, they'll come up and tell you everything, and they'll come up and be more will coordinate more with you and cooperate in every sense. So I think these are the very, very small things, but they make a large impact when the project developer is trying to go on ground and deal with the end users.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anshika. There's now a couple of questions in the chat. They're quite, I think, related to each other. So Phil and Nandini ask about gender mainstreaming and what is the incentive for a project developer to be gender responsive rather than just gender sensitive?
So there are a few things here. Number one, a carbon credit, which is gender responsive, fetches a better price in the market. Number two, they open their doors to gender sensitive financing. They have a better prospect of marketing their project. So if there are investors out there who want to invest into projects which are, not only combating the climate change, but if they are getting one more additional societal benefit of that project, investors are more likely to invest in such projects. So these are a few financial benefits of implementing such projects.
Wonderful, thank you. If there are no more questions, I think Nandini's question was probably also incorporated in those previous two. I think we will leave it there. Belinda's got an actual hand up, not a virtual hand. That's all out in the corner.
I can't type, but Anshika, I think that was a fabulous presentation. Can you comment on whether you're seeing more demand from buyers for these types of gender sensitive or gender responsive projects?
So I cannot comment directly on that, Belinda, but then there is definitely an upsurge in SDG investing, in impact investing. So how all the carbon market standards also had to move from not only quantifying the emission reductions but also the SDG impact. That is, I think, a proof in itself that how the market is changing. I'm sorry for that. So there's definitely an upsurge on the demand of such projects, but I don't have numbers to give you for today.
Thanks, Anshika.
Thank you.
sorry, I'm on mute. Anshika, if you have 1 more minute for one more question.
Yeah, sure.
In the chat, adding to the local Panchayat topic, what we can also contact with Para Committee, a local community which is consisted of the respected members from that specific area. Religious figures are also part of them. I think that's more of a comment, but an interesting insight to add there.
Definitely. I'm so sorry for this.
That's
But
okay.
Mm.
Did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I'm completely in agreement.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I know that you've got to run. So on behalf of everyone in the room, thank you a lot for your insights. I see a little hand joining. So thank you so much for your insights. We really, really appreciate your presentation and thoughts on the matter. So thank you. Okay, and I will next pass over to...
What a chabita.
Just mute Anshika. I'll next pass over to Alexandra Carranza from Verra. Alexandra is a legal counsel at Verra, where she advises the organisation on its legal affairs. She's based in Australia and is a qualified lawyer in Peru with extensive experience in environmental and climate change law and policy. Now, I know we had a couple of issues viewing the last presentation, so can everyone see this one? Maybe a hand up or a thumbs up. I'm getting a thumb from Belinda. If I can get a couple of other thumbs or hands, we'll push ahead with the presentation. Okay, seems like a fairly good. If anyone can't see it, please drop in the chat and I can potentially share. Otherwise, Alexandra, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'll be talking about the gender integration initiatives in Verra. So I work as legal counsel, so my approach to this topic is a bit different from what we just heard, which is great as well. So you guys can have two different kinds of perspectives on the topic, which is always good. So I'm just this is the agenda I have prepared for today. I know we have 20 minutes approximately. Just a quick reminder of what Verra does, what our programs are, and then our view on gender integration with the VCM, the voluntary carbon market. What are the gender-related safeguards in our programs? And finally, something we're very proud of, our recently published W+ label. Which is it's really great initiative. So as you may know, Verra builds standards for a lot of activities, including reducing deforestation, improving agricultural practices, addressing plastic waste, and achieving gender equality through mostly our Sustainable Development Program, which I will show you shortly. So we manage programs to certify that these activities achieve measurable high integrity outcomes. We have 5 programs, the VCS, which is the most popular one that addresses carbon action or relates to carbon action, the jurisdictional and nested red, the Climate, Community and Biodiversity Standard, which is the CCB, and the Sustainable Development Verified Impact Standard, which is the SDVista. And the Plastic Waste Reduction Standard. Today, I will be talking about the VCS, the CCB, and the SDVista, because they have direct and very express provisions on gender integration. So what is Verra's view on gender integration in the VCM? Social and environmental safeguards and sustainable development benefits, including gender benefits, contribute to sustainability, permanence, and accountability in carbon projects by protecting against potential harmful outcomes. Enhance social and environmental safeguards and credible reporting SD benefits. SD means sustainable development, can help minimize reputational and legal risks for project developers and buyers and risk to the livelihoods of on-the-ground stakeholders. As SD benefits receive more attention, buyers are seeking more credibility in the assessment and reporting of social and environmental risks and SD benefits. And this is something we're working to further enable in our next version of all our programs. So I think there's no doubt that there is a growing demand from buyers for repeatable, high integrity, gender responsive carbon credits. This demand is mostly or recently been pushed a bit more by the ICVCM core carbon principles, which establish the minimum requirements for a credit to be labeled as of high integrity in the market. Gender equality is included under the core carbon principle number 7, which is sustainable development benefits and safeguards. The criteria 7.8 includes requirements around equal opportunities, equal pay, assessing risk impacting gender equality, and protecting against violence towards women and girls. Criteria 7.2, 7.4, 7.6, and 7.7 also refer to women's rights and interest in different scenarios like labor rights, land acquisition, Indigenous people and communities, and stakeholder engagement. So Verra acknowledges its role, and we have improved all our program rules. And the ICVCM has approved the VCS program recently. Based on market engagement, gender benefits are one of the top sustainability development benefits buyers look for when selecting a carbon project to support. And as the VCM grows and buyers become more sophisticated and clear in their expectations, we can foresee that there will be more investors who are prepared and willing to pay more for high integrity credits, that can deliver more sustainable development benefits, including those related to gender equality and integration. According to the Ecosystem Marketplace 2023 report, CCB and SD Vista label VCUs receive a 78% price premium compared to VCM projects without a co-benefit certification. And many of these projects include gender benefits. We will talk about the W Plus label, but I must say that today there haven't been any demand yet for these credits. We are in a piloting stage at the moment, but I'll touch on that a bit later. But I thought it was important to mention it now that we're talking about numbers in the market. So I wanted to put 2 examples of projects in the ground that are certified by Verra and different programs that consider gender integration mechanisms or measures, or that have tangible outcomes on the ground. So the first one is the women cooperatives as part of the Rimba Raya Biodiversity Reserve in Indonesia. This project is certified by the BCS standard, CCB, and is currently under validation for SD Vista. This project, the project design includes mandatory inclusivity of women in decision making, which is huge. The Rimba Raya women's community cooperatives have led many successful women-led initiatives, including income generating opportunities such as chicken and egg farming and salted fish micro-enterprise. This is claimed to have led to a 100% increase in revenue from this activity, which is a very tangible outcome. Not only communities are looking for, but also investors. They wanted to see reflected in real tangible results, investments when they select a project for these reasons. Second example is the Udzungwa Corridor Reforestation Project in Tanzania. This is certified by BCS and CCB. And this project is targeting an increase in women's employment from 14 to 25%. This percentage has been established with an understanding of the local context where there is historically patriarchal system in place. And while it may not look like a lot difference in the numbers, this increase of 10% is a complete achievement apparently in the context of this locality. So yeah, I wanted to to let you know two projects that are having these impacts currently. And well, Verra has always had safeguards in our program rules. If you are familiar with the VCS, we've always had a safeguard section that talks about no net harm. It talks about stakeholder engagement, no sexual harassment provisions. It has equal work, equal pay concepts. But since to obtain the approval of the ICBCM, we have improved all our programs to have a new standard to increase our standard in terms of safeguards. So basically, gender considerations are integrated more explicitly into project design and implementation. The project ensures safeguards to protect women in the community. It is required to identify risks related to women and girl safety. It provides it intends that the project provides equal opportunities in the context of gender for employment and participation in consultation and project activities. So essentially decision-making and governance, including women, and equal pay, equal work. I have pointed out here some provisions in the VCS program. Just to quote a couple, this is a section about safeguards, so 3.18. And there's one provision that states that all communication and consultation shall be performed in a cultural appropriate manner, including language and gender sensitivity, directly with local stakeholders on their legitimate representative when appropriate. There's another provision in section 3.18 as well that says that the project proponent or any other entity involved in the project design or implementation shall not be involved in any form of discrimination or sexual harassment, and so forth. The CCB, which is our standard that has a lot of preference when it comes to these social benefits before we launched the SD Vista, has lots of reference to best practices in terms of local engagement, including gender integration. There's a couple of provisions that I also pasted here in case you wanted to visit them. And finally, the SD Vista that also has several reference to gender integration. We additionally have a grievance redress policy that it's the space to manifest and complain about failure to adhere to their program's rules, including safeguards. And internally, we have a human rights policy that regulates Verra's organization internally, which I haven't included in this presentation. So just jumping into the W+ label, which is our latest initiative on gender integration. This was launched in June 25th this year. And what we've published is an updated guidance document for project proponents applying to W+ labels to VCUs issued to projects registered under the VCS program and the W+ standard, which is managed by an organization called WOCAN. So basically, the required documentation is published in our website. And it is available on the VCS rules and requirements page. So if you don't, I'm going to make a little introduction on VCU's labels and certification. So a VCU label, a verified carbon unit, so carbon credit certified by Verra under the VCS program. A VCU label indicates that a unit meets the requirements of other non-VCS standard program or is eligible or qualifies to be traded in specific markets. So an example different than the W+ label would be the Article 6 label we currently have as well. So a VCU can be associated with multiple labels, enhancing its market value and recognition. So we have two certification labels that indicate that a unit meets the requirement of non-BCS standards or programs developed by nonprofit or governmental organizations, which would be the W+ standard. And they can be applied to VCUs once it's assessed that it conforms with the standard requirements. So the W+ program is developed by WOCAN, which is the Women Organizing for Change in Agriculture and Natural Resource Management. It's a standard or certification framework that provides metrics and procedures to quantify, verify, and monetize women's empowerment results within projects and supply chains. It provides framework for designing as well as monitoring results within projects and generates W+ labels, W+ labels credits, quantified and verified units of improvement in women's conditions from a baseline in one or more 6 domains, which are in the circle on the right. So at least 20% of the revenue from a W+ credit sales is granted to women's group to be used as they see best fit to address community and climate adaptation needs and opportunities. So using what I just explained about the generalities of a VCU label, the W+ label signals that a VCS project conforms as well with the requirements of the W+ standard. The W+ label for VCUs are active and available as well in the Verra registry, so you would be easily see next to the project if it has been approved or granted this label. So investors will be able to see it in our public website. Projects that follow each program's respective registration, validation, and verification requirements are eligible to receive the W+ label VCUs, but the W+ standard has its own procedure. So that's something they do. And what we provide guidance for is the registration or the use of that label in the VCUs issued by Verra. So what's the importance of the W+ label VCUs? So for project developers, it provides design framework for integrating women's empowerment activities into carbon projects. It provides financial incentives to expand activities to benefit women. It meets increasing demands of buyers for high integrity social impacts and benefit to communities, and avoids the pinkwashing claims. For buyers of VCUs, so investors, it provides high quality carbon credit with gender co-benefits that go beyond that the box checking, addresses the need for the S and the E in ESG, and contributes to the achievement of the Sustainability Development Goal 5, which is about gender equality, and provides transparent ways to support local women. I don't know if I'm still on time, in the time.
No, keep going.
But,
no rush. No rush.
All right. So any VCS project that conforms, as I said, with the VCS and W+ standards is eligible to receive the label. And projects must have valid W+ certifications for the entire verification period for which the VCUs are being requested. This one is a bit specific. I may skip it. So the W+ standard has specific rules for how many VCUs may receive a W+ label within a VCS project, and these rules are in the W+ standard guidance document. And the available W+ labels will depend on the type of project activities, which would be in the circle I had in the previous slide. health, leadership, time, income and assets, food security, and knowledge and education. There are two ways that the W plus standard may be used to generate VCU labels, depending on the number of women that are benefiting in the project area. 100% W plus labeling for all the VCUs generated, and number two, a subset of VCUs labeled based on the percentage of women that are beneficiaries from the total population of women in the project area. So examples of eligible VCUs are first we have the cook stove or biogas project, wherein almost all women within the project are benefiting. So they receive one label for one VCU. And then another example is a forestry project where 20% of women are benefiting from improved access to non-timber forest products. So 20% of carbon receive the W plus label. WCAN is launching an optional piloting process for 2 or 3 projects. And this is for project proponents that wish to receive the W plus label, and then therefore require more guidance on preparing their project. And more information about the requirements for joining and how to start can be found in the W plus standard website. Any questions?
It's a great presentation. Thank you, Alexandra. That was really, really interesting. And this W plus edition sounds like a really innovative development to the sector. I have a couple of questions, and then I'll jump into the chat. So for others, please do pop some questions in the chat. I see there's one already. Just from I think like a market practical perspective, what's the impact of the W plus label? Is there going to be like a price premium to those credits, or is it just a part of ESG strategy for buyers? What is I know that it looks like it's quite new. So what are where do we think that the W plus label is going to go in terms of impact on the sector?
So ideally, so in terms of market sentiment, we do foresee that it is going to be a lot of demand for this type of credits. I think the gold standard has an initiative that was launched, and I don't know if it was touched upon today, but they have had some issuance on their own initiative, which is great, and we hope that it's the same for us. I think it will reflect on the price for sure, because we already are having very good impact with the VCUs. So with the carbon credits are being certified by the SDG STAP program, which is basically the same because this is an an SGD 5, which also correlates to this program. So yeah, I'll go back to that slide. Yeah, so this is what I was mentioning. These numbers are further explained in this report from the 2023 issued by the Ecosystem Marketplace organization. Is that? Yeah. It is showing, right? Yeah.
Well, it looks like your connection is a little unstable. Maybe try stopping sharing and we can continue the Q&A.
Yes.
The other question in the chat there is about does the W plus label certify female inclusive projects or gender diversified projects? That's come from the team at DFAT in Ho Chi Minh City. So happy for them to elaborate on that question if they'd like.
I mean, just waiting if they're going to elaborate, but I think the answer is both. Yeah, because it is, so the organization, it's W plus for women, but we encourage gender integration.
Belinda's got a hand up, I see. Sorry, I'm just ticking through the different boxes, Belinda, so just go for it.
Yeah, Alexandra, that was fantastic. It's so good to hear in detail about the standard that Verra's, overseeing and the evolution. My question is, do you find it difficult to encourage project developers to take on these additional standards, or are you seeing lots of interest? Is there lots of interest in starting to think about applying for these, standards and the W plus, or is it a difficult sell?
So this is, for example, something I discussed with the team before joining here, and then joining the call, the meeting, and then just to make sure I had the insight of the people who work closely on this every day. Like that would be the innovations team. And they said that they do know that, I mean, they do feel like gender benefits are one of the top sustainable development benefits buyers look for when they're selecting projects. But this is based on the experience of the SD Vista program and how it's been working so far. But I don't think they have more data about, like, particularly how will it work only supporting when this program that only supports women unfolds.
So may I ask another question, Declan?
Of course.
So based on what you know,
Go for
what advice would you give these partners? Like many of the people that have joined this forum today are partners who are really working hard to, make businesses that are successful in the carbon market. So from what you know, what advice would you give them about thinking about how they might tackle gender equality or gender outcomes?
So I think, and this is just, I feel how the market is moving. We're all about high integrity carbon credits. And we're like, what we're seeing is buyers that are getting more and more sophisticated. And there's also more scrutiny in the market. People are not willing to get involved, and sometimes they just want to get this, not be associated with projects that have some sort of human rights scandal or human rights scandal, basically, like the last year. And so I think if I was to invest in a project, I want to do all the due diligence required to see that this is a solid project. And to me, having women integrated in the project has, as you have mentioned, several benefits, and including the sustainability of the project. And even depending on the sector you're in, women's impact, it could be even bigger than in some others, right? Women have a really important role, and if I want to make sure my project has long-term benefits, I'm gonna try to go for the project that can show me that he's taking in consideration all of these things. And the thing about the W plus label is that it's not only a tick on a box, because the benefits they certify or that we certify have to be real.
Yeah. Thanks, Alexandra.
You're welcome.
All right. Any more questions? Quentin Tao, does that answer your question there? Did you want to jump in with the follow-up? We've got a couple of minutes left, so if anyone has one final question for Alexandra or Belinda, now is your chance. All righty. Well, if that's it then, I'd just like to, give a massive thank you to our three speakers, Belinda, Alexandra, and Anshika. I think That was a really valuable 3 presentations. This is a really interesting and super important space, but it can be quite complex for partners and project developers to chart. So thank you very much for your time today, and for everyone on the line. Yeah, really appreciative of you jumping on the call right across some different time zones. So thank you, everybody. And yeah, we look forward to being in touch soon in different ways. Bye for now.